Hey guys, so today I want to talk about the US general election or presidential election, should I say, that is happening in maybe 2 or 3 weeks. So that's why I wanted to do the video right now and not wait a little bit longer because I think it's pertinent to talk about it right now because I don't think that much is going to change in these few weeks, and I think that most people have their mindset about who they are going to vote for. And I think the most important thing for me, I mean, as a non American citizen, to say is that, I mean, I have been following elections all over the place because I don't know, I like to follow those kinds of things in other countries and in my country and so on and so forth. And I have to say that the top note, if you will, that I have to draw from the US presidential election and the way people in the US elect their president is that it has to change. I mean, I don't understand how a democracy that has been an example for so many other democracies since its inception more than 200 years ago, I mean, way more than 200 years ago, is still choosing their president in this way. I mean, I do understand why it is. I mean, the electoral college and all of that exists because they want to have balance between the country, the different states, and they don't want two states, for example, like California and New York, to have always the say of who gets to be president. And I do understand that, and I do think it's a very interesting question. However, in most democracies in the world, let's talk about Canada, let's talk about France, let's talk about Spain, let's talk about Brazil, let's talk about so many countries that are also democracies and that also call their citizens to the polling booth in order to cast their vote. Most of them choose directly who the prime minister or president or whatever is going to be, or at least I mean, every vote counts in the same way. In the US, the vote is not always that equal, to be honest. So that's why in the US, I think it's the only country in the world where people, for example, say that voting for a third party or voting for or not voting at all is like voting for their adversary. And in that way, I do think that's true. I do think that's true in the US because you don't really have choices in the US. You have left or right, basically, or up and down, if you will. But that's it. You don't really have any more options. It's like, imagine if you were driving a car, basically, or whatever, and you only got to choose left or right. What about going back, or what about going maybe not forward, but maybe a little bit to the left, but not fully to the left, or to the right, or not fully to the right? So many options. Or maybe it's not a car, maybe it's a plane, so you go up or whatever. There are so many directions to go, and in the US they give you two, and that's not many at all. And I think that's a very flawed system because of that. And we can see in recent years, maybe in the last 20 years in the US, since September 11th, to be honest, democracy in the US has been failing horribly, and not only because of their foreign policy, but because it's not working even for the people in the US. I mean, there's a health system that is not being covered. It's not covering everyone. An education system that doesn't make any sense. It makes people pay exorbitant amounts of money in order to get an education that sometimes it's not even that good. And you have to pay like not millions but thousands upon thousands of dollars to have a decent education. And for what? Because you have to keep paying even after you die in some cases, which is insane. And there are so many flaws in the system that you cannot understand how. I mean, at the core of it all, it's the election process, is the democracy, is that you get to choose who makes those choices for you, basically, in the Senate, as a president, in your state, legislature, in the Senate of the state, whatever it is. So your mayor, your council people, all of that. So it's really curious that no one has ever tried to change it. And I think the answer is quite clear why. And it's because the Democrats and the Republicans, which are more alike than different, to be honest, don't want to give power to anyone else. They don't want to share with anyone else. They're very cool having two sides. And maybe, there's a third minority of people that don't really go with either of them, but it's such a minority because people are driven to think like, okay, if I'm not with those two, I'm going to be with the third little group, and those people are crazy, basically. So that's unfortunate, to be honest. And it's slowly becoming not a democracy. I think if you just give people two choices, it's not really a democracy. And I think that's a problem. You might say that there are more far right or right or different types of right in the Republican Party, and maybe in the Democrats you have the ones in the center and the ones that are kind of in the right, and also in the left, and even progressives, which I think it's a so bizarre term in the US, because there are not really progressives in the US, at least not meaningful progressives, if you will. So if there were more parties, if people were more um, not engaged, but if they told people, okay, you can really choose whatever you want as a party, and build it up, and really stick to your guns politically and socially and whatever, I do think it would have such a more it would be more representative of what the US is like. And that country has the complexities of being such a huge territory where a lot of people, different people live, not only immigrants, but also black people, but also indigenous peoples, and also, Asian people, and so many people that come from so many different backgrounds, and even speak different languages, and even think of life in different ways. So and that's not even taking into account different genders and different sexualities and different all other differences that may exist. So it's really complex, and I don't think that the US has taken that into account when they choose who is going to lead them in different areas. So as for the presidential election, I think the voting will come down to a few, very few states, as it has been in the last few elections. And for this time, I think that the four states to watch are Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and to a lesser extent Nevada. In the last election, if you recall, there were two states basically that defined it all, and that even Donald Trump wanted to do recounts and to sue and all of that in those two states, because they were very close, the results, and those were Arizona and Georgia. However, in this time, Georgia and Arizona, according to the polls and to very different, and even polls not only in the presidential race but also in other races, represent those two states as becoming more and more Republican, at least for this election cycle. So it has been said by most pundits and different news outlets and all of that, that Georgia and Arizona are basically going to go Republican for sure. However, some states again that had been had elected actually Donald Trump back in 2016 and then elected Joe Biden in 2020 are again, in the pendulum, if you will, battleground states as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Out of these three, the most important one, according to population, basically, it's Pennsylvania. Of course, Pennsylvania has two big cities, which are Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and those two cities are very are Democrat leaning, if you will. But there are other little towns and little cities in that state that tend to lean more Republican, and it will all be defined in the suburbs of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, to be honest, at least for that state. And I think it's a really close race in that state. If you check out, the polls and all of this, if you check Pennsylvania, for example, there's a New York Times poll that was released rather recently, and in those ones, Kamala Harris wins by 50% and Donald Trump loses by 47, but it's within the margin of error. And there's another one from American polls in which Donald Trump wins and Kamala Harris loses, but it's also in the margin of error. So, it's very close in that state. Also, Michigan and Wisconsin are with Pennsylvania are part of what some people call the Rust Belt, which is the ancient area, not ancient, but older area of the United States when industries first actually settled. The motor industry and steel and coal and all of that just settled in those regions. I mean, those regions really powered the earlier industries of the United States, and now that's in decay. We know about everything that happened in Detroit with many mother companies not being able to keep up basically and having to shrink their part of the workforce basically. That also has happened to a lesser extent in Wisconsin and also in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was huge in coal, for example, for many years, as West Virginia is still to this day. So there are changes that are still existent, and of course, in those particular areas of the country, many older people live, and they live in not the best conditions. There's a lot of poverty in what used to be a very rich area of the United States, basically in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, also in other states around. But I think it's very prevalent in those states. So again, if you see, for example, Michigan, you can see active vote poll that gave 51% to Kamala Harris and 49% to Donald Trump, but the margin of error is almost 5%. 5%, yes. And Emerson College did a poll also, but in two versions of that poll, they tied in that in Michigan. So it's absolutely close. And again, Michigan has some cities. I think it's Detroit and maybe Ann Arbor, if I'm not mistaken. But all the rest of the state is really populated, but more sparsely. But those counties are really heavy in their amount of potential, votes. And same goes with Wisconsin. You have, the main. Cities like Milwaukee, which are very Democrat leaning, but then you have a huge space uh, beyond Milwaukee, and those spaces are very into Republican ideals. And of course, we have all the discourses of the culture wars, all of these things that affect how people think and affect how people may perceive the candidates that are present. And I have to say that one of these states that is very interesting is Michigan, because Michigan is the place where the largest state, the state that has the largest Muslim population in the United States. That's what I wanted to say. I mean, there's even, I think it's Dearborn or something like that, a city that sounds like that, that has a huge Muslim populations, well, mosques, and I think the mayors have been Muslim, and it's very prevalent there, and that's great, of course. But what has happened now is that with the support of the U.S. government, of Joe Biden's government, to Israel, giving them weapons to basically, blast Gaza and now Lebanon, and potentially, I mean, they have also bombed Syria and maybe potentially Iran too. And that's a very complex situation. I mean, we know Iran hates Israel and Israel hates Iran, and that's a very big problem. But people there, Muslim people there, would think about their Palestinian families and Palestinian friends, and would say, like, why would I vote for Kamala Harris, who hasn't condemned this and is potentially going to keep helping and keep selling weapons to Israel? And of course, Donald Trump is going to do exactly the same because he's very, akin to Benjamin Netanyahu. So that it's like an impossibility there. And I think that what the polls in Michigan show is that that population is just not going to vote. Many Muslims in Michigan are just not convinced of voting at all. And I think that has to be not only respected but understood, and really taken into account, because it's really easy to say that if you don't vote you hurt democracy. Well, yeah, maybe, but also if democracy is hurting you, then what is democracy's answer? Because again, as you have two candidates, and both candidates are pro-Israel and pro-bombing your families in Gaza and Lebanon and so forth, why would you support them? So you have to understand these people too. Of course, the populations in New York and in Los Angeles, in California, I mean, are going to be very, very pro-Democrat, because it's the popular thing. Oh, it's a woman and it's a black woman, and of course that's a very big thing. And other countries in other states in the United States that are much more conservative would not think that a woman or a black woman would be good for president. So it's biases and racism. I mean, it's a factor also in elections, in decisions, and misogyny and so many other things. It's a very important thing. And also to think if your candidate, whoever you vote for, is actually going to do what they say that they're going to do. Because as we know, Donald Trump promised so many things when he was running for president, and then he became president, and then he did some of the things, and then he didn't do some other of the other things, because he realized he couldn't unless he had a huge support. And of course he had partial support in the legislative area. I don't remember if he always held the House and the Senate or what it was like, but he didn't have enough support to do whatever he wanted. And of course, Joe Biden has had the problem that the Senate is divided, like basically divided in two halves, and he doesn't hold the House. And according to polls, again, he's not. If Kamala Harris wins the presidential election, she won't have the House, and it's very possible she won't have the Senate either. So she's going to be opposed by the forces basically that vote for whatever proposals she has. So it was going to be difficult for her even if she wins. And if Donald Trump wins the presidential election, there is a chance that he has power enough to do whatever he wants, at least for his first 2 years in office. So it's a complex thing, and it's a very difficult thing. Of course, I think it's very interesting to watch these elections and to really learn the complexities around it. And I think it's very, I mean, I think people really forget about what it's really at stake, and what it really means when you don't vote for someone or do vote for the other one. I think it's a very complex situation, and discussion basically. But I don't think people have to be nasty about it. I think that again, everything is very polarizing in most of the world, to be honest, even in those countries that have, like mine, many parties, that can also be difficult. But I think again that giving choices to people is very important, and giving voices, because you're not giving, I mean, in the United States the system is not giving people a voice. And which is weird, because it's supposed to be the motto of the United States, that it is the country of freedom. But how much freedom can a country have if they don't give you a voice to express that freedom? So it's really strange. And people think that just because you talk favorably of Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, that makes you free. But that doesn't make you free. It also makes you free to criticize both of them, because to be very honest, and I will close with this, they are both awful candidates. I mean, not in the same way, of course, but Kamala Harris has many things against her. I wouldn't vote for her if she was a candidate in my country. Not at all. For me, right, she's to the right, maybe a little bit to the center, but more right than anything. And of course Donald Trump is far right, and all of that does not represent what I believe in. So I think it's very incredible to see people that are LGBT or Muslim or black or indigenous supporting some of the things that some of these two people actually say and think about doing. I think it's a disaster. I think that the conclusion of this video is that it is urgent that after this election, because of course this election is in 3 weeks, so who cares? So you cannot change anything from here to there. But after this election, I think it's very important that the people in the United States demand a change, not only in the electoral system, but in their political system. I mean, things cannot go on in this way. If in 4 years you're choosing your president in the same way, and your structure is the same, I mean, I don't see how many years more it can be sustained. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And you can see the cracks already appearing all over the United States with these, like, almost separatists kind of feelings and hate and these culture wars that are actually fed by people that just don't want to live next to the other people. And that's a very serious thing. So that's all I have to say for this. I hope whatever you want as an outcome in this election happens, and I hope the best happens for the a country that is pivotal in our ecosystem in the planet, basically in a political ecosystem, I mean, because if the United States goes bad, well, the rest of the world has to take notice and do things accordingly. And it happened when Donald Trump was president the last time. The rest of the world had to adjust and start really realizing that the United States cannot be the only option for everything in the world, because the United States wasn't there suddenly, basically. So maybe that's going to happen again. We don't know. So how much can we trust the government of the United States, even outside of the United States? So whatever. I do think that it's very important for you to go out and vote. I think it's essential, to be honest. And I think you make the best choice, not only for president, but also for Senate, for the House. If there are governor, elections, mayoral elections, whatever other, elections, or maybe referendums, or other questions are in the ballot, just go and vote. But because it's very important to make your voice be heard in whatever way possible, basically. So yeah, that's all that I want to say. Thank you so much, and comment down below whatever you think. Goodbye.